30 plus years, just doing photography. This is my first Fujifilm. Such a weird, like, newbie mistake to make, but that particular day I was like, I don't really want to carry the extra weight. I'm going to leave this camera here. There's an argument of, should you charge for, by the hour, or should you charge per project? There you go.
Hello guys, welcome back to the podcast. Today we have with us Jose, and Jose is sitting in Dallas right now. So hi Jose, how you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm glad to be on here. We had some technical difficulties, but we worked through it.
Good to have you here. Yeah, we worked through that. Me and Jose have been struggling for about 5-10 minutes, but we managed. What time is it over there right now?
Right now it's 1 p.m. I'm in Central Time in the United States.
1 p.m.
So.
Okay, it's nighttime here. Excellent. Okay, so Jose, what brings both of us here on this podcast, as you know, is our love for photography. And we're both professionals, I believe. I went through your website and your Instagram. It was really good. I really liked your website.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I really like your Insta. And there's a lot of questions, a lot of stuff I'd love to talk to you about. But the first thing that I want to know is a bit about your early life, perhaps, and how that led you to getting into photography.
Sure. So I started out pretty young. I want to say, it wasn't a fancy camera. The first camera I bought was like a point and shoot 35 millimeter. Actually, no. Before that, I used to use 110 film. My mom used to take pictures a lot with, are you familiar with that format, 110?
Yeah.
So I had 2 or 3 of those, and I would just, put the cartridge in, start taking photographs of all kinds of stuff. I was probably maybe about 5 or 6 at the time. And a lot of that comes from my grandfather. My grandfather used to take photographs all the time of the family during family trips and just kind of other events. And then my second cousin, which is my mother's cousin, he was a photographer as well. Although I wasn't too familiar with him. I didn't know him that well. But my mom tells me stories because he was the older cousin, so he was probably in his late teens, early 20s when they were in like their early teens. So they'd go over to his house and hang out, and she used to always tell me stories about all the photography stuff he had all over the house. Like in his pantry, he didn't have food. He had rolls of film and filters and a bunch of other equipment. And so she thought that was for her, that was something that was
Sounds
really
like a fun guy.
Yeah. And so I attribute my love for photography to that because, I grew up, when we were, every now and then for special occasions, my grandfather would pull out the slideshow, and we would go through a lot of the old photographs that he took when they were younger. And so that was always, and it's funny, even now, like I still love I'll just put together a group of photos on whatever, and I'll just have it playing and I'll just watch it. So for whatever reason, that cemented that love of watching imagery and particularly memories. Like the type of photography I do currently focuses more towards portraits and people versus landscape or still image, still life. And that's just because that's probably where I got that from, was just going through the process of seeing those memories and all those pictures of people. So I started I'd say about maybe 6 with the 110 film cameras. And then when I was a little older, I bought, I saved up some money and I bought, it wasn't fancy at all. I don't even remember it was probably like a Ricoh camera, like a 35 millimeter Ricoh point and shoot camera. And just went crazy whenever I was able to get film. My mom would buy some film too, but back in the days, you would just take your pictures and then you'd get it developed, and a good quarter of the amount of images you took were good, and then the rest of them were complete garbage because you just didn't, I was a kid, I didn't know what I was doing.
Exactly.
So, but yeah, it started about between 5 and 9, 5 and 8. So it was pretty young. So I've been shooting for a long time now.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is really young to start. I'm quite impressed by that. I started probably I did a course when I was 24 or 23.
Okay.
So, and then I did photography professionally way later. So yeah, I also played around with the point and shoots when I was younger, but I never thought I was going to be a photographer, or never even thought on that way that I might want to be. But that's really cool that you kind of figured it out in the beginning, perhaps.
Yeah.
By the way, I don't know what you're talking about when you say 110.
Okay, so 110. I wish I had it in here with me. I have all my old cameras packed up. Oh, actually, you know what?
Is it one of those thin? Is it one of those thin ones?
Yes, it's a very thin format.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Hold on just a second. I've got one. Let me grab it real quick.
I know what you're talking about. I had one.
Yeah, I have one here. Yeah. I forgot I had one lying around, because the other thing I do is I buy vintage camera equipment. At least I thought I had it here. Maybe I don't.
Nice.
Oh no, here it is. I found it.
You know, oh, you got it? Sure.
Yeah, sorry. So
Yeah.
it's let's see. I don't know if my camera will
Okay.
focus on it.
Can I see the other angle?
There you
Can
go.
I-
So
Yeah,
this
yeah,
is
I
the
got
this
that.
is the front.
Show me how. Okay. Yeah. I had one. I
Come
remember
on.
now. This is from the 80s,
Yeah,
isn't it?
I would say even maybe 70s
dad-
as well. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Here, let me pull out the film. This one
Yeah,
actually had a
yeah.
film cartridge in it. I was actually very surprised.
No way.
So let's see. Here you go.
That's awesome. Yeah. I don't remember the film, but yes, that is
Yep.
it. I had one, and I've actually taken some pictures on this.
It's a-
I never knew you called it a
It's a
110.
very. And I'm not sure why. It might have to do with the size. I don't know because it's a really small negative, so the images are not very good at all. But this was just, it was it was just a consumer grade point and shoot camera. But my mom used to use them all the time. In fact, it has a connection here. Let's see if it'll focus on it. That's for a flash cube.
Yeah, it does.
So you used to buy little cubes, and it would have either 9. Sometimes if you bought a bigger one, 9 or 8 different sections, and it was just a one-time use flash. So once that flash would go off, it was useless. So it was a disposable flash unit. So then you'd stick it on the camera, and once you would use all the flashes, you'd remove it and buy a new one and stick it on the camera. So I don't have any of those, at least with me. I have
That's
them
awesome.
all bagged up.
I so wanna try that.
I don't even know if they
Wow,
have
that's
110 film
amazing.
anymore. It would be nice if they did. I know 35 millimeter and medium format, you could still get some stock of that, but I haven't shot with film in so
So
long.
get some. It'd be really hard to find that. You might, but it'd be really hard probably.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jose, tell me, when did it get professional for you? When did you really get into it? You thought this might be a career, a job. I'm gonna earn money from this. When that happened?
I want to say probably 1997. So I've always done photography. I've always kind of, it's been a part of kind of what I do as a hobby. I even now, like, I do it professionally, technically. So I work full time, first of all. So I do work full time for a company, and I do video production and some photography and design for them. But I still do freelance photography, so most of it's just portrait work at this point. But the first ever paid gig I did was for my cousin's wedding in Southern California. I want to say it was 97 or 98. I can't remember because they got married pretty young. So
That's a while ago.
yeah, it was a while ago. It's so funny because
That's a while ago. So, yeah.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
one of the funny things about that time period, it's like in my mind, I'm like, okay, that was, I was young, but it wasn't that long ago. I had somebody, so I sometimes I'll mentor some photographers, and one of them mentioned to me, they came up to me, they were probably about 18 or so years old, and she said that she had inherited a camera from her grandfather. She's like, hey, I've got a camera. Could we spend some time so I can learn how to use it? She's like, it's this really old camera from like the 90s. And it's funny because in my mind, I'm just like, oh, that wasn't that long ago. And I thought about it, and I'm just like, no, that was over 30 years ago. That was definitely a long time ago. My brain hasn't caught up with the fact that it's been a while
30
since then.
years.
Yeah.
Same
So-
here. Same here. Yeah. We're on the same page.
Yeah.
The 90s feel like just a little while ago for me as well. I'm much older than I look.
Yeah, so that was the first paid gig I got. It was my cousin's wedding. Yeah, and I was shooting on a Canon Rebel 2000. It was a 35 millimeter, kind of entry level.
Canon
it was an
Rebel
entry level
2000.
SLR camera. Yeah.
I had a Canon Rebel. I don't remember which one it was, the 2000 or what, but that was in 2004 maybe. So it's probably
Okay.
not that one. It's probably a new model.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that your first paid gig was a wedding, and weddings are quite stressful.
Yeah.
It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of responsibility.
It's funny.
Were you comfortable doing that at that time?
Yeah, I hear that a lot. Like a lot of photographers, I've even had a couple. I've had them come with me. I said, look, why don't you come with me on a wedding shoot? I basically, I'll have, like, if it's a lengthy drive for them, I'll cover their gas, and then, we'll have a meal afterwards. They understand they're not getting paid, but I think that's probably the thing that hinders a lot of people the most is they feel the responsibility of, like, I have to get these shots because they're paying me a lot of money. So I'll have them come with me. They're not getting paid. They're basically there to just feel out the experience of being in a wedding. Obviously, I think with every shoot, which is really funny because I've been shooting now for what? I mean, I guess technically I started when I was about 9 or 10, so it's been 34 years, 30 plus years, just doing photography.
Wow.
But every time I do a gig, it's so funny. I don't know why. At the very beginning of each gig, there's a lot of times I have that weird, like, hesitant, like, I don't know what's going to happen, or I don't know if I want to do this. And you would think that would go away after a while, but 30 plus years, I still have that weird feeling, like, I don't know if this is gonna be good. And I think it's just because I myself expect a lot from me. Now, granted, if the people didn't already like the work I did, they wouldn't have bothered hiring me in the first place. So there's always that kind of struggle with your own, like, you want to be able to please yourself. And that's usually what I always try to tell people. It's like, if you're going to do photography, obviously there's that concept of getting the imagery that your clients want, whether it be a portrait or for, commercial photography. But if you're not really enjoying it yourself, it's going to show in your work, and you're going to kind of have that mentality. And I can't remember who was it that mentioned it, where they said that they started resenting it because it felt like a job, which, I don't do it full time. So that's the other, I say the other advantage I have over doing it full time, because when you are a full time photographer, and I've done it a very short period of time in the past, if you're not on top of, what you're doing and how you're running your business, it can be a chore, and it can be really difficult to get through those emotional ups and downs of going through a long period of time without a project, because you're so hyper focused. Well, unless you've gotten some passive income, or unless you've set yourself up to where you don't have to worry too much. I think Scott talks about this a lot in a lot of his videos, about the fact that he has put himself in a position where he doesn't have those moments of like, I need to work because I need to pay my bills. Luckily, it took a while, but he put himself in a position where he saved up money for that. So for me, like, shooting weddings has never been really nerve-wracking. And I can tell you some stories of some, not horrible things, but some really, really challenging moments, like right before the wedding started, that you have to think on your toes. And I think maybe that's what it is that I kind of enjoy some of that. Like, when I go to a venue, most of the time I've never even seen what it looks like. I have no idea what the lighting conditions are. I don't even know what the walls are, the colors of the walls. I show up and I have to assess and figure out, like, okay, what am I doing in 20 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe even less sometimes. So I've kind of gotten used to that. But it is interesting that you mentioned, the first paid gig I did was a wedding, and it's been a while since I've done one, only because I've kind of transitioned. I've gone through a lot of different transitions in my life on what type of photography I do, based on like where I live and where I'm at and who my friends are. But yeah, so I still enjoy doing them today, and I think there's a connection to a wedding and kind of like the emotional reason behind it that I enjoy it. That if you're just doing it just for as a business, and there's nothing wrong with that, it might be a different set of emotions behind why a person would do it just for money, and the other person might do it because of their own, they like their emotional attachments to those types of ceremonies. So
Yeah, exactly. So, now I'm curious about two things that you mentioned. Number one, what you're doing right now. You say you have a full-time job. You're also doing graphic designing, video production. I want to know a little about that. And also, before I forget, I also want to know about your transitions between different categories of photography that you just mentioned as well, that you've been through a few.
Yeah.
So tell me about both these things.
So currently, right now, I work for a manufacturing company. They create safety and rigging hardware. So like, say, hooks, shackles, chains, different. It's a huge company, so that we have a bunch of other manufacturers underneath us. But I work on their global marketing team, so I create videos for them. So it could be anything from application videos, like training videos showing how the products are used safely, or just promotional material. So like, we just had a big merger earlier in the year, I guess technically last year, and so I worked on a lot of the video promotional material for that. Which, it's funny because you would think, for somebody who obviously, and if you look at my work, the majority of the stuff I do have what I call promotional, which some people would consider commercial photography. I haven't done a whole lot of that, and I probably would be open for it, but it's not something I really seek out. I really like photographing people. And so you can kind of tell that in my work. Most of what I do that has a lot of extensive shots is portraiture. But for what I do for a living, it doesn't really involve people a lot. I mean, it'll involve people working, so I'll take shots of people using the machinery, either whether it be in the forge or the manufacturing or the assembly. So that's what I do for a living. I do some graphic design for them as well, and I have done graphic design freelance and professionally in the past. Again, I've been around for a while, so I've kind of like I have the problem where I want to do too many things, and so like I kind of have to rein it in sometimes and just figure out, okay, let's pick one hobby.
Me too.
Yeah, and it's hard because
I can understand.
I
that.
can't.
Yeah.
I have a hard time sleeping at night because my brain doesn't shut off because I'm constantly thinking about all kinds of things that I want to do. So, but that's what I do for a living.
Do you shoot? You shoot yourself and you edit yourself?
I have,
when
yeah.
You're making the videos.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. So that's the other thing
And
that's interesting.
You have people. Do you have like a team with the lights? Sorry.
No, I mean I'll have some people help. Like you're talking about for my day job, right? For my full-time job.
For your day job.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty much a one man crew. And there are times where, like, say recently, a couple of weeks ago, we went to a location in a city called Longview, Texas, where one of our biggest manufacturing and forges are, and we were working with a distributor. So they wanted to do kind of like have you ever seen that series? I think it's on Discovery called How It's Made, where they basically pick either a product or some type of service, and they do a documentary on, like, the process of how that particular item is made. So they did the same thing with one of our products, and I was there to kind of shoot some B-roll and to help out if needed. But that was the only time recently, actually at all, I think, with the current company, and I've only been with them for a couple of years, that I've had other people filming with me. Like, I'm usually just doing it all myself. And that's nice, but at the same time, it can be difficult. Like, obviously, if you have, a lot of times when I'm doing stuff for them there, unless I'm doing like an interview that I know we're going to be in one spot, I usually don't try to take as much equipment because it's a lot to carry. So I'll try to have like a monopod, and I've got what I'm currently using now, my Canon R3. I use that both for still and for video. I used to use a cinema camera to shoot video, and then I'd bring a DSLR to shoot images, but when I realized the video capabilities of the camera that I just got, I was like, I'm just going to use this because I can have both and not have to worry about packing extra stuff, and it's just one machine to do both.
Exactly.
But when I do stuff personally,
Cameras are crazy now.
It depends on what the shoot is. Like I said, most of the time I do portraits now. Every now and then my wife will help me. She'll come with, and she'll assist, like in holding, something, either be the reflector or just kind of helping with whatever. But no, I'm always been kind of a one man crew, and so that's nice. But at the same time, there are times I wonder if, because whenever I'm produced, like say if I shoot footage and I do a video, I shoot it and I produce it based on what I like. If I'm not happy with it, I don't send it out. And there are times where I wonder, I'm like, okay, that's kind of siloed. I want to be able to also work with other people and have their inspiration and their 2 cents, so to speak, in the video process. But so far, I've been lucky where they've enjoyed everything I've produced. So I haven't had any issues with that.
Do you enjoy video more or photography?
I think it depends on the subject. For photography, yes, I don't know. So it's funny. So one of the things I do enjoy about video, and I think it's because of my love for portrait photography, is when I do interview style photography. So like, interview style videos. So one of the things I like is, and this kind of goes into my photography too, but I like to get people talking about what they're passionate about versus them feeling like, what do you want me to say for the camera? So a lot of times, I'll have somebody put a script in. Now, granted, if it's for a specific product or a specific mission or vision or whatever, then yes, we'll have to abide by what they've written. But a lot of times I'll have them read the script, I'll film it, and then I'll ask them questions about what we just talked about, just to get them talking. Because another issue too is that not everybody's great in front of the camera. You have people that will talk all day long, and then as soon as you put a camera in their face, they just get really nervous, and that affects their ability to just talk. So I chit chat with people a lot when I'm on a shoot or when I'm filming video. It's something that I learned from, I don't know if you're familiar, he's an American wedding photographer primarily. His name is Joe Busink, and he's a really incredible guy. And it's so funny because he himself will even say, he's like, I'm not the most technically advanced photographer, but what he does is he loves capturing specific moments with people. And there's a lot of times where I mention you put somebody in front of the camera, and unless they're used to it, like if it's a model or somebody who's just used to being in front of the camera, they're not going to know what to do. So if you just chit chat with them, you get to know them, you kind of, you basically, what I do is I bring their comfort level up, and I lessen their anxiety, so that way they can feel more comfortable, and the more comfortable they are, the more of themselves will show up, and that is apparent both in portraits and in when you're doing video. And then once they're comfortable, they just start talking about the subject matter based off their own passion and knowledge versus what do you, the cameraman, want me to say. And I think that's really critical, because otherwise, they're going to feel very robotic, and even you as the viewer, you're going to be able to tell, hey, this person kind of looks uncomfortable. When they're really just passionate and they're sharing what they love to do, it's a huge difference. So yeah, I think if it's video, I like doing those types of documentary style interviews, and then very kind of like emotionally driven kind of pieces. I don't know if I have anything on my website that kind of reflects that, because I've honestly haven't made myself do those types of side projects. I've just been so busy with work. So like a lot of the material that I've been working on is just like promo for, a new piece of hardware, or, something that some kind of training event. So
Yeah. Awesome. Okay.
And then I'm trying to remember what the other,
that's really
what was the other question you had? It was what I did for a living. And
Your transitions,
the transitions.
On what type of photography you've been doing.
So that is an interesting.
Like what
No, go ahead.
Yeah. What I'm saying is that what type of photography? I know you like people, you like portrait a lot, but that's probably the answer. That's the one that you prefer. But which different types have you tried out? Which one do you think is the best one for you professionally, and what do you do mostly?
So I started out, like I mentioned, with doing portraits. So the first, like you said, the first paid event I did was wedding, and it's funny because in that period of my life, I was, so between 19 and 25, a lot of the people that I knew, a lot of the friends I had, were either getting engaged or married. So a lot of the work I did was based on my circle of influence. So I did a lot of weddings, did a lot of engagements when I first started out, did a little bit of portraiture. So one of the things I picked up on really, really early, which I'm surprised at how many people, whenever they when I chit chat with them, if they're starting out in photography, they don't consider this. But I started out in terms of like getting used to shooting with people. I started just asking a couple of people that I knew, hey, can we set aside some time? We'll just go out and take some pictures, which I think now it's kind of so commonplace because we have great resources like Instagram or YouTube. But back in the early 2000s, I think YouTube came around 2004, 2005. So before that, like you either had, chat rooms or you had message boards that you probably would share that, but it wasn't so openly known. And there's a lot of people that they say that they wouldn't have thought about asking family members or friends just to practice with, because the funny thing about getting the comfort level of people up, so that they can feel like it's a more natural process with getting their picture taken. The same goes with the photographer. So if the photographer is really nervous because of one of two things. Either they're still unfamiliar with their equipment, which that happens a lot, especially if you buy a new camera or if you're just starting out. So they can feel that kind of tension when you're sitting there fumbling around trying to figure out what to do, and the comfort level with talking to people. So that's one of the first things I actually tell photographers when I start mentoring them. It's like, it's not a necessity. You can still do this and not be a people person, because there's a lot of introverts out there that, I don't want to say this in a bad way, they hide behind their camera, which I understand that, they want to take pictures and they don't want to deal with people. But if you want to do business, you're going to have to deal with people at some point. So one of the things I tell them is that you need to start working on your people skills. Like you need to be able to learn how to talk to people, learn how to converse with them, get a sense of who they are. Because a lot of times, I mean, I get it, maybe in commercial photography and landscape, it's not so much the case, but especially in portraits, not only are people purchasing your ability to photograph, but they're kind of buying you as well. If they don't like you, if they don't feel like they're comfortable with you, they're not going to come back, and they're certainly not going to tell their friends and family about you. So I tell people that it's important to kind of get to know how to interact with people. So a lot of times when I'm shooting, I'm doing what we're doing now. I'm talking, I'm chit-chatting, I'm talking about stories of the times that, I shot, funny things that happened, or if it reminded me of something. Because either it's one of two things. They get comfortable with just chit-chat because it's not just somebody who's in front of them, not talking to them, holding a camera in their face. And it's just kind of one of those things where I think it's instinctually nice when you're conversing with somebody. Obviously there are some people that just don't like to talk to people. And, if you're chit-chatting with somebody and you can kind of tell they don't really want to talk to you, then that's one thing. But I think it's important to make people feel comfortable. And so with the portrait photography, I started early, and like I said, I asked a few friends of mine, if they could if they were willing to kind of just act as a family being photographed for, a portrait, or, a senior, whatever the case may be. What I wanted to shoot, I would ask people, hey, can you trade some of your time for me, and then I'll edit the pictures and I'll send you a few of them. And that allowed me to get used to, one, honing my craft, because that's the thing I think a lot of us really, even now, is after 30 somewhat years, you get a new piece of equipment from when you buy one, and you just want to rush out and start taking pictures. And it's kind of a big mistake, because one, unless it's very similar to what you've already been using, you have a whole new machine to learn, and so you can't just throw yourself out into the world and not get used to the equipment. So that's another thing too, is like I always tell people, one, learn how to talk to people, and two, learn your equipment, because whether you're doing it for a business or not, you still want to be able to know how to use the tools that you've got. And I think photographers, a lot of them that I've talked to, I think we're pretty bad about this, where we get a new camera, we don't even bother looking at the manual. We just start fiddling around. We want to see what it does. We're excited to take pictures.
Straight
and
away.
It's hard, because there are some things that are listed in that manual that you'll never figure out, or you'll never find out if you don't read the manual. So I know it's kind of one of those things where it's like, oh, I'll read the manual, whatever. But I think it's important to at least get a chance to work with your tools. So at that time, it was really early on. I was talking to people, getting used to chit-chatting with them. And the funny thing is that for a while, I ended up stepping away from doing weddings and engagements, and I did a lot of modeling portfolios, because I met a couple of people who wanted headshots, who needed a couple of different themes for whatever they wanted to get work for. And of course, their friends would see that, and then their friends' friends would see that. So there was a long period of time where I was actually doing nothing but headshots and modeling portfolios. And I guess what Scott often refers to as, what does he say? I forget what he calls it. Is it just modeling photography? There was a couple of videos ago he mentioned that there are some people that's all that they do. They post nothing but those types of images, but it's not really an industry. So a lot of that work I did again as a trade service, because I still wanted to get experience in working with people. And then other equipment. So like I slowly started buying different pieces of equipment. So lighting, I started getting into studio flash photography, which I had never done before. And a lot of the stuff I did, and a lot of the stuff that people do when they start off in the beginning, is they don't do anything in a studio, because either they don't have the budget or the experience, or they don't have the access to the resources. So they just do stuff outdoors, which is fine. It's not a big deal. But that was a scary step, to try to use flash photography. So I had never done that before, and of course the first couple tries were terrible, because I didn't know what the hell I was doing. So, but
exactly.
And then after,
it was tricky in the beginning.
Yeah. And then after a good stint of time doing a lot of stuff with just friends of mine, models and things like that, I got in a relationship and got married, and my stepdaughter was in competitive cheerleading, and so I started going to the competitions, and just it was kind of more of a sports related, because it's a lot of fast movement, a lot of dancing, a lot of fast choreography. And so that was a new challenge, because I'd never done that before. And I'm like, well, this is crazy. My camera's way too slow to do this. So I started experimenting with, okay, what other kind of camera would I need for that? And started doing more sports-related photography with cheer. And then she got into drill team. I'm not sure if I don't know if drill team is global. I imagine it would be, but I don't know if you know what drill team is. But it's very similar to dance and cheer. It's kind of a mixture of both. And so she was on that for a number of years, and I did a lot of drill team photography out on the field, during competitions, a lot of dance competitions. So I did that, and in that mix, I met a lot of families and parents. So I ended up doing a lot of senior portraits, high school graduating senior portraits, and that's kind of what I've been doing the last couple of years, is mostly portrait work geared towards graduating seniors, so people that are going into university. So that's kind of what I've been doing the last several years, because of the progression. And then of course in between, like weddings and the modeling, as my friends got married, they started having families, so I did a lot of family portraits, and then their kids started growing up, so I would do kind of holiday themed portraits. So a lot of portrait work for sure. I did do some what you would kind of call like promotional or commercial photography, I guess, for a couple of small companies, local companies here and there. Some of them did some hat designs, so I did some of their product photography for their hats. I did some stuff for NASCAR. I don't know if you're familiar with what NASCAR is. the company I worked for at the time was sponsoring a driver, and so I did a lot of the designs for the vehicle that he wrote, a lot of the wraps for the cars that he drove, and so they sent me to a lot of the races, and I took pictures of stuff on the track, and that was just purely because of where I was working at the time. But yeah, I mean, I think it's the same for, I would imagine, for a lot of other people. Now, I'm also a very people-oriented person. I have a lot of connections, so depending on where I was at in life and who I was talking to and who I was close to, that's kind of what dictated my work. Because again, I'm not a working photographer. It's mostly been freelance. I think there was like 1 or 2 years that I actually did more photography for like a daily income, or I'm sorry, a yearly income versus just as a hobby or freelance. But it's just more of a freelance hobby for me at the moment. So I think that's kind of nice, because it doesn't really, because I watched the video that Scott uploaded this morning. He talked about, is this guy a real, I forget what the title was. Is he a real photographer? Because he kept talking about like different stages of his life and him not being sure if he made it. Like, have I made it? Oh, I've definitely made it now because I'm doing this type of work and doing this and that. Yeah. I don't know if you've watched that video yet. Yeah. But I feel like...
No, I didn't see this one.
It's pretty good, yeah. I think it's one of those things where I don't feel a lot of the pressure because I work full-time, and this is kind of... Any money that I make with my photography ends up going, and I reinvest it in either equipment or services, which the last few years has been a godsend, because I've had equipment fail on me that I've had for a long time. So I had flashes that needed to be replaced. I had a camera that died on me earlier in April, like right in the middle of a shoot. So I had to replace that camera. Things have been falling apart little by little, because I've had them for so long. So
yeah. Tell me you had second body.
That day I did not. So it's really funny, because I always tell even the photographers I mentor, I say, hey, make sure you have a second camera, even if it's an older model that you don't use often. Charge that battery, make sure it's working properly.
What did you do then?
I had to run home and pick up my additional camera, and we had to change locations. It was such a weird, like, newbie mistake to make, but that particular day I was like, I don't really want to carry the extra weight. I'm going to leave this camera here. If I had had it with me, it wouldn't have been an issue. Yeah. So I always tell people, it's like, bring a second camera. It's important to have some of those things in mind, because you never know what's going to happen. The camera can fail, you can drop it. There's all kinds of things that can happen. And it's just, sure enough, my luck that day, I did not follow my own advice, and I had to spend an extra hour running home, getting out of the camp. It was a mess. So.
So you're saying right now it's kind of a hobby, you do it freelance. I have a business question in a way.
Sure.
You've tried wedding, you do portrait, you tried commercial to some extent. Right now, if you had to go full time just on photography, what do you think is the most rewarding? What makes most financial sense, you think, if you had to go full time? So
that's two different aspects. It's interesting. So rewarding and financially, like financial sense, because sometimes there are things that make financial sense that may not be what you really love to do. So financial sense right now, gosh, I don't know, because the market is really weird right now. I hear a lot of things about the commercial market and how crazy it can be, especially within the last several years. Post COVID, I think a lot of businesses in general, but specifically things that deal with creative jobs, photography, art, that kind of things. They've been kind of back and forth, I think, from what I hear. So if I had to choose something financially, I mean, I hate to say it, but I think probably weddings is probably one that, because you're always going to have, it's either weddings or commercial photography, because I want to say you're always going to have a need for both. Portraiture, it kind of falls in that weird valley of, yes, people are going to want portraits done, but the problem with that, and maybe even the other forms of photography, is you have to figure out where you want to draw your, I don't want to say this in a negative way, draw your line. It's like, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm charging, and this is what my market is. Because understanding who your customers are.
Plus, people have to be willing to pay a certain amount.
And it's funny because there are some photographers.
So in portrait, they wouldn't be paying that much.
Especially when they start out, like photographers, they have that sense of, one, they don't feel like they know enough, so they're not really charging a whole lot based on just, hey, I'm learning, and that's probably fine, But I think as soon as you start learning a little bit more, I think the problem is that a lot of photographers, when they start, they say, okay, I'm just learning, I'm just starting out, so I'm not going to charge much, and I'm going to do this or that. But they never actually set a goal on when that's going to change. Because you can keep doing that for years and years and years, and you're eventually going to get to a point where you're like, okay, I've gained a lot of knowledge, but I'm still not, if it's a financial thing, I'm not charging enough to cover the, what I'm doing. And maybe, like, say at this point, if you want to make a transition to do it full time, but you're still charging and you have the mindset as somebody who's just starting, it's going to be difficult to try to all of a sudden do a huge jump and say, hey, okay, so you have people that are coming to you that have been customers in the past. And I want to say, I know Scott's talked about this too. And then all of a sudden you're charging a lot more. Now, I think this was because to cover like cost of equipment, but just in general, if you're just getting better and your skill set's getting better, there's an argument of, should you charge for, by the hour? Should you charge per project? And how much do you charge? And that's always all over the place, because you never know what a person's situation is. So like some people may charge more because they have more bills to pay, they have overhead, they have a studio they're renting, they have rent to pay. Me, I'm on the other end where I've had a lot of experience, but I'm not living off of my photography salary, I guess, if you want to call it that. So I kind of pick and choose projects here and there. I don't work all the time. It's usually seasonal, so there's usually certain times of the year that portrait season is what our senior season, what I call it. But I don't have that kind of necessity to continue to try to get work in. Most of it's word of mouth. Actually, all of it's word of mouth for the most part. And so I think it's I would say maybe weddings, but then again, that's also within that category, you have different tiers. So I mentioned a photographer earlier, Joe Busink. Joe Busink is, if you look him up, he does a lot. He still does. He did a lot of celebrity weddings, a lot of like people of, I'm trying to think of another word. A lot of really well-off people. So his target was, he's like, I'm targeting the 1%, the people that want an experience versus wanting a service. And he does. I'll send you a link of one of his lectures. It's really, really interesting, because when I watched what he had to say, it kind of changed my perspective, for me anyway, because he was driven by his love of capturing moments, which I think a lot of photographers can relate. Like they want to capture the perfect moment, but he also stressed about giving people a good experience as well. So obviously for what he does, he charges a lot of money, but he offers a different experience than what a lot of other photographers are able to give. And he does still shoot a lot of film in this day and age, which that's more of a hobby thing now. I mean, there are some professionals that do shoot film, but he does both. He does digital and film, but he does a lot of film. And he kind of has that mindset of like he loves what he does. In terms of making money, like financials, like a financial decision, I'm not really sure what would be a better choice or not. Again, I always listen to, even though Scott's industry is completely different from what I do. A lot of the things he brings up, a lot of the values he has, they're still relatable, totally relatable. So although when he talks about certain things, it just doesn't apply to what I do. So, but a lot of his understanding of business and just personal, keeping your life, not trying not to chase after something that's unattainable, like in terms of financially, that don't get into debt too much when you're trying to get this business going. I think I would still want to work with people, so it would probably be weddings, and probably some type of portraiture.
100%, that makes sense. I agree, but I want to know in your area what you thought.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to gear.
Okay.
Because you said you shot a lot of fast action as well, then you do portraiture. I want to know what gear you've had, what gear you have right now. What do you prefer? What's your favorite?
So when I started doing photography, the first digital camera I bought, for the first digital wedding I shot, because I remember the first wedding I did, it was 35mm film. I still use 35mm film, and I shot a couple weddings on that. And then I thought to myself, this was like 2006. I was like, I need to find a digital camera, because digital was getting pretty big, and I was like, I don't want to have to spend a fortune on film, getting that developed, scanning. It was a process. And so I decided, it's like, well, I need to do something digitally, and I didn't even have a 35mm camera. Like my camera at the time, I don't remember what happened. There was something that happened to it, so I had to send it off. So I booked the wedding, and I had no camera. So I had to borrow a camera to shoot this wedding, and the camera that I borrowed was a Rebel XTI, and I got used to that little camera.
Nice.
And so when it came time to buy one myself, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to buy the same model because I'm kind of used to it already. And I still have it. This is this camera I bought back in 2007. So this is what? I don't remember when this camera came out, but that's the camera that I started out with, and it was the first step into digital photography. And I used that camera for a long time, and it was so funny because one of the things that I couldn't understand at the time, again, I didn't study photography, I didn't take any, you would have thought with me loving photography as a kid, I would have taken it in high school and college. Didn't do any of that. I don't know why. It was really weird. I was an introvert when I was in high school. So I didn't do any of that. I didn't pick it up until I was in college again, like in terms of really trying to learn new skills. And I was getting frustrated because a lot of the shots I was taking weren't coming out how I wanted them to, and I'm like, why is this not working? And what I didn't realize at the time is I just shot a lot of those things with my, I still have that lens too, my 18-55 18-55 Canon kit lens. It's like a f3.5 to 5.6. Yeah, you know what you would get with any DSLR or SLR camera in the late 90s and early 2000s. And I used that thing all the time, but I didn't realize if I wanted to get different types of shots for a look, like I wanted to try to get more shallow depth of field. I didn't even know what depth of field was at the time. And so when I realized, I'm like, oh, this is what I've been missing. And of course I bought what a lot of people buy when they first start out, is I bought a 50 millimeter 1.8. It was like the little plastic Canon f1.8 lens, yeah. And so I used that. Yeah, the Nifty 50. So I used that for a long time, and I'm like, okay, I get it. I understand. There's some other things that I probably should look up too. So I started doing some more research on YouTube and things like that. I upgraded to what was it? T3i. I bought a T3i in like, I don't even remember, mid 2000s.
I think I had one too.
Yeah. And so again, it was still a consumer grade, I guess is what they call it, entry level DSLR. And the very first, professional, I would call it, 35 millimeter. I'm sorry, yeah, 35 full frame, I guess you would say. Full frame DSLR was the Canon 6D, and I bought that one. And at the time, that was up until the recent purchase of when I bought my R3, that was the first time, and I think the only time I bought a camera that was brand new. I bought everything used. One, because I couldn't afford anything new, but also, even at the time, on my mind, I was just like, there's no sense in buying something brand new, because if I can get it for cheaper, and if it's just a little bit older, and I always tried to make sure to buy from other photographers too, because I knew that they would more than likely take better care of their equipment. So the 6D was my first full frame DSLR, and it's so funny because when I brought it home and I had a 24 mil f1.4, yeah, the L series lens 1.4. I put that on that camera and I held it up to my face and I looked at the viewfinder, and I was like, I can see more through this camera. How is that possible? It didn't click. And I'm like, let me get my T3i. Yeah. I put it on the T3i. I looked at it and I'm just like, I can see more. Like, what the hell's going on? Yeah. And even at the time, I didn't realize there was a difference between sensor sizes. So APS-C was what I used, was the T3i, and full frame was totally different. So at that point, I realized not only had I not understood the difference in the aperture of my lenses, I didn't realize that the sensor size was going to affect the frame of view, and what they call the crop factor. And I was like already well into my 20s at this point, so I had always had the eye for photography, but like a lot of people, I didn't necessarily choose to understand a lot of the technical aspects. And I learn every day, so I still don't know everything. But when that hit me, I'm like, okay, I understand. So I used that knowledge, and I realized that, because there were a couple times where I was like, I'm shooting with a 24 mil lens. Why is it not as wide as I want it to be? It's because I was shooting on an APS-C sensor camera. So it's just so funny how you just kind of continue to grow. But most of that was still portrait work. Nothing was moving. And so the 6D, I can't remember. I think it did like 4 or 5 frames a second. That may even be generous. I don't remember how many it had. So when I started doing stuff,
I had one.
Yeah, I don't remember. I just sold it recently.
Actually, I forgot as well.
Yeah, I want to say it's like maybe 5 frames a second. So it's not super fast at all. But for what I did, it was perfectly fine. Portrait work, nothing's moving. But when I started doing competitive cheer, dance, and drill team, like fast moving, like I realized I'm not getting what I want, because I would sit there and try to match it up, and I would miss the moments, because with those types of things, you need a fast camera. So I ended up buying a used Canon 1DX Mark II, I think like 4 years ago.
Wow.
Primarily because it could do.
That's the
I
right
think-
camera for that.
Right.
Yeah.
It was like, I think 14 frames a second in RAW, and I think 16 in JPEG. I forget. I can't remember. But I would always shoot in RAW, just because some of the times when I would shoot with, like say for instance on Drill Team, you would start in the early afternoon, so the sun's really nice and bright. But then just a couple hours later, the sun would go down, and there were times where I would forget to just make sure, like, okay, look at what's the histogram saying, what is my exposure, because I would be shooting at whatever settings I had about an hour ago, and then a lot of my images are too dark. So luckily, if I was still doing RAW, I could at least recover some of that. But I learned. I was like, okay, so every half hour or so, whenever I could notice the sun was going down, or I just got used to it. Years of shooting it, I'm like, okay, I know that I need to adjust my ISO or whatever. So that camera did me well for a long time, and that was a huge game changer in terms of like being able to capture all that material. The downside was I would shoot. So like say an average football game, I would probably shoot between 2,500 to 3,000 photos per night. So it was a lot. And even that was just because the majority of the fast frames was during their performance. So I didn't do a lot of that stuff before or after, but during their performance. And so like it started eating up hard drive space. So that was the issue I had with shooting a bunch of frames, and that's what most people have. And then the raw files at the time they were just CR2, so they were, they were normal raw files for I think it's a 22 megapixel cam. No, 20.1. I forget what the.
No, it's less.
Yeah. But they were about 25, 30 megs.
Actually, you're talking about the Mark II. You're
Mark
talking
II.
about the 1DX,
Yeah, 1DX
Mark II, right?
I think it's
Actually,
20.
That might have been more.
I think it's
okay.
22. I can't remember.
Could be. I'm not sure.
Going into that, so that was the other thing that I've never really been big on. Like, I understand having good equipment for the proper job, but I was never hung up on the megapixel war, I guess. Not war, but the megapixel, whatever you want to call it. Because there's a couple guys that I know, and there's one guy, he recently, within the last year, bought a Nikon Z8. Is that something that just recently came out? I'm not familiar with Nikon bodies.
Not sure.
Anyway,
Not
is
sure. Yeah, me too.
mirrorless 48 megapixel. No, I want to say it was even. Anyway, something either 45 or above, somewhere in that range. Huge resolution. But he shoots a lot of sports. And so I didn't want to be that one photographer to be like, well, what do you, because he does other things too, but I thought to myself, I'm like, do you really need, a big sensor for that? I'm also one to not, like, if somebody wants to buy what they want to buy, I assume that they hopefully did the research, and it's, and unless they ask, like, hey, what do you think about X, Y, or Z? A lot of times, once you already have that idea of like what you want, more often than not, you're going to buy it, unless when you're asking people for their advice, you're more often than not, you're asking them in hopes that their answer is going to justify the decision you already made, because you're already banking on, like, I want that camera, I want that lens, I just need other people to say good things about it so I can feel good about that purchase. But that was the problem I had. I would try to reserve shooting at fast frame rates just for specifically when I needed it, but it was great. I had never had a camera that could shoot that fast before. And currently what I'm using is a Canon R3, and I had a little bit of, like, I was trying to figure out, because remember I told you the camera died on me during the middle of a shoot, so I was like, okay, I could totally get away with still doing work with my backup camera, which is a 5D Mark III, which is that's a great camera, but I didn't have anything that could do the fast frame rate. And I was like, I need something that can replace that. And the only thing, like, I know that I could do mirrorless and do electronic shutter, but that was also something really new to me, so I didn't know. I hadn't shot with it. I hadn't proved that it could do that. So I was like, okay, do I get an R5? Do I get an R6 Mark II? There's a lot of different good mirrorless cameras out there. And I did a post in the Facebook page and just kind of gauge what people's responses were. But I still liked the form factor and the features that the R3 offered, because it was kind of similar to the 1DX Mark II. And in order to replace the 1DX Mark II, or maybe even to get that body, or even just get the 3, it was going to cost, like, because they're still expensive, I want to say $6,500 US for a Mark III, and I was just like, that is so expensive. And the R3 at the time was on sale, and I was going to sell some equipment as well, so I ended up saving about $2,000 with what I sold and then the sale. And I'm like, it's still an expensive camera, but I didn't feel as bad about dropping the money for it. So, and I've been using it for about a month now, and I really love it. The R3, I haven't even touched the full amount of capabilities it has, but that's pretty much what I use camera body wise as an R3. And then lenses, primarily for the portrait work I do, I use a 70-200 f2.8. I think it's the USM Model 2, so it's an older lens for sure. And primarily,
I've got the exact same lens.
Yeah, it's a great lens.
I love it.
Yeah,
by the way.
it's so good.
It's a
I was
fantastic lens.
debating on like trying to sell some of it and then other equipment to maybe get it up, because what I'm afraid of is eventually some of these lenses just may not work with the newer camera bodies. Like right now, I bought an adapter for the R3, and all my lenses work just fine. That was another thing that I had to consider. It's like, mirrorless cameras, you can't, you have to have an adapter, which the adapters aren't that expensive, but I didn't want to get myself into this camera system that I wouldn't be able to. I didn't want to replace everything, at least right away, if not ever. Because again, I've had that lens probably.
Now you can slowly change to the RFs.
Yeah.
Slowly at your own
and
pace.
see how that works. Yeah. So I
got
use
the same
primarily that lens for portraiture, and then although I don't use it as often, I usually take these two for sure, and it's the 70-200 f2.8 L lens. I had an f4 was it 24 to 105? I think it was a 20 or 28 to 105. That is such a good lens, f4 lens, but I didn't use it as often, or it was very similar to the. I could do the same settings, similar settings. It didn't have as much reach as the 105, but like my 24 to 70, that's pretty much almost like having a very similar lens. So I ended up selling the f4 24 to 105, but I used again 70-200. 24 to 70. Every now and then I'll bring a 50 millimeter 1.2 or 1.4. I can't remember.
Yeah, 1.2 is the L.
The only problem I have with that lens is
1.4 is much smaller.
I think it's the 1.4 then. The only problem I have with that lens, and I don't have an issue with it in terms of like, now that I understand what its limitations are, it is a little soft. It's a little bit softer than some of my other lenses for whatever weird reason. If I want to shoot at anywhere between 1.2 or 1.4 to like maybe 2.8. So I usually shoot it at 2.8 unless I just don't mind it being really soft. If I'm shooting portraits work and I'm doing like subtle details, like if it's a graduation, they'll have a ring sometimes, or something. If I want to call attention to it, then I'll shoot pretty open on that, but it's a little soft. And then I have
you checked out the 85 1.2?
I've never shot with it, no.
Portrait?
And that's another reason is like I really I want to try it, but I have like I don't know if it would be a focal length that I like. In terms of the focal length. Now, in terms of the aperture, I've never shot with a 1.2 that large of a lens of a lens size, but I need to. I could try to rent it and just see if I like it, but. With the with the 70-200 and the 24 to 70, like it kind of gets. That's the range I usually work in. Yeah. And then every now and then I'll bring out
I've got the same too.
Oh
That's
yeah,
what I use.
yeah. I mean they're great lenses, and a lot of photographers have them for that reason. It's just that they're so good.
Exactly.
I have a 16 to 35 as well, f4 that I'll bring out every so if I want to get like a
you
really
have you have the Trinity, the whole
I do,
Trinity.
yeah. I do. Yeah. The only other,
I don't have the 16. I don't have the wide.
It's really nice.
And to be honest, strangely, I've never missed it.
But
I've always wanted to get it. I know I might need it someday, but so far, for almost a decade, I haven't needed something that wide. At 24 is old. I've just moved further back. I guess.
Yeah.
You make do with what you have. So.
And the only reason I changed is
cool
I was pushing I was pushing myself to do something different, because I've been using again 70-200 and mostly the 50 for. Most, I would say like 90% of my portrait work. And not to say that it didn't suit me well, but it's like, all right, let me try something different, because that's another nice thing about photography is if you can afford, or if you can just maybe borrow or rent different equipment, you might find something new in a different camera body or a different lens that you wouldn't have thought of before. So I decided I wanted to do some wider high-speed sync portraiture with dance specifically. And so I was like, okay, I want to be able to get a nice wide shot, because I would do a lot of them in a natural environment, so like a lake, or maybe even some architecture. So I wanted to get the architecture in the shot and not so much about the close-up, which is funny because I'm used to shooting close-up. So I was like, let me do some environmental portraiture, and I started bringing out some strobes to do some high-speed sync. on location. And there's a lot of stuff I did this last year, specifically with a wide angle. And I'm like, okay, this is really cool. I like this. Oh, let's see. Okay, I thought I was about to lose connection there. It said trying to sync. I'm like, no, please don't. It's fine. But yeah, that's primarily what I use. Now it's funny. I just bought, and it just came today. I just bought a Fujifilm camera. This is my first Fujifilm. So I bought an XE1.
That looks nice.
And
that looks really cool.
It's a rangefinder style camera.
What's the sensor size?
This is 16 point. I can't even remember. It's a 16 megapixel sensor. From what I understand, so I was trying to do some research because I wanted to be able to do to try something new. I was just talking about trying something new, and I thought to myself, okay, I want to maybe get into Fuji, because Fujifilm's been very popular the last several years with all of their. I think that, what is it, the I don't even remember what, X100 Mark V, I think, was really big like a couple years ago. So everybody was like buying this thing. And the two things I didn't like about that camera, in terms of me just trying it out, one, you couldn't swap your lenses, so it's a fixed lens system, which that's fine for some people. Yeah, but also cool. It was just stupid expensive. You couldn't find them. You had a hard time. They were on back order for so long. So I did some research and trying to find older Fujifilm bodies that people still really liked. And the funny thing about this one is, apparently this body had, I'm trying to remember the name of it, X-Trans sensor was one of the first mirrorless cameras that Fujifilm made. So the sensor apparently is what photographers are actually wanting and liking. This one, and then the X1 Pro, I think, are the two cameras that share the same sensor. And there's apparently a particular look that this sensor gives. And I was just like, okay, sure, why? Whatever, I'll give it a shot. And I found one at a reasonable price. And also I bought one of my first manual lens, and actually this might be my first manual lens I've ever bought, because I had to buy a lens for the camera. So this is the it's a 35 millimeter 1.4 by let me see, Seven Artisan, I think it's the name of the company that produces these. And this is really, it's all metal, and it's a really nice little lens.
Wow, sturdy.
Yeah, but I'm gonna give it a shot. Really cool. And the other thing I bought, of course, just because I had to justify getting a different body, is I bought an adapter so I can use my Canon lenses. So we'll see how that works with this Fujifilm camera. But
how cool, how exciting! You have two new toys.
Yeah, I do. I'm gonna try them out this weekend. So. But in terms of older camera bodies, like I still have most. The only one I don't have anymore is because I just sold it so I could help pay for the R3. I don't have my 6D anymore. But every camera body I've ever bought, I still have them, because one, I use them for so long, and two, most of the times, like, they're not really going to get a lot of money for it anyway, and some sentimental value. It's like I just keep them around. And then of course I collect a bunch of vintage cameras. So I've got way too many cameras. I don't have as many as some other people, but I've got probably well over 20 or 25 for sure.
That's a lot.
They're all in a box. They're packed up, unfortunately.
That's awesome. That's awesome. No, that's really interesting. I think that kind of wraps up most of the questions I had.
Yeah, sure.
To be honest, it was really cool listening to your journey and your thoughts on everything. And also exploring what you're using these days. So I think that kind of wraps it up.
Yeah, this was really fun. It's really nice. Yeah. I think it's important to hear other people's perspective and how they do things, because I always love hearing other people. That's why I like watching a lot of other people's, like, even if they're in a different industry. It's just really cool to see what they enjoy and why they enjoy it.
Yeah, it's enlightening. Exactly. Yeah, that's why I'm doing this. I'm so curious about how people are going about their thing in photography around the world, because every place has its own style, has its own culture stuff. So that's what I want to know. Yeah. I want to know what people are going through in the same field. So Jose, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciated it. It was a lot of fun. You really gave a lot of insights, and maybe we can do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can do it.
Yeah. Sounds good. So till then, you take care. You have fun with your new toys, and we'll reconnect at some point.
Absolutely. I'll talk to you later.